Welcome to Mindset Mondays, the bite-sized podcast designed to build a happier, healthier headspace. Think of it as a learning snack for your morning commute to set your week up right. I'm Mark Holloway, and today's episode is built around a simple phrase you've probably heard before. Chop wood, carry water. At first glance, it sounds underwhelming, even a bit dull. But beneath those four words is one of the most powerful philosophies for building happiness, fulfilment, and a grounded life, especially in a world obsessed with big wins, instant results, and constant stimulation. So today we're going to unpack where this idea comes from, why it's so psychologically powerful, what modern science says about it, and how you can actually apply it to your life starting today. So what's the origin of chop wood, carry water? The phrase is often linked to Zen Buddhism. There's a famous saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The meaning? Life doesn't suddenly become extraordinary because you reach some higher level of success, clarity, or achievement. You still have to do the dishes, you still have to show up, you still have to handle the basics. The difference is not in what you do, it's in how you experience it. We live in a culture that glorifies the highlight reel. We're constantly chasing the peak. We're told success is the goal, happiness is something you arrive at, fulfillment is waiting on the other side of achievement. But here's the problem. If your happiness is tied only to outcomes, then most of your life, the process, feels like something to endure. And that's where the phrase chop wood, carry water becomes quietly revolutionary, because it shifts your focus from outcome to process. Let's ground this in research. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, known for his work on flow state, found that people are happiest not when they're relaxing or achieving big goals, but when they're fully immersed in simple, structured, meaningful tasks. That includes things like cleaning, cooking, practicing a skill, doing focused work. Flow doesn't come from intensity, it comes from presence and engagement. There's also something called the progress principle, identified by Teresa Amabile at Harvard. Her research showed that the single biggest driver of motivation and happiness at work is making small, consistent progress on meaningful tasks. Not massive wins, not overnight success, small wins repeated daily. And then there's hedonic adaptation, the idea that big achievements give only temporary boosts in happiness before we return to baseline. So if you're constantly chasing the next big thing, you're stuck in a loop. But if you learn to appreciate the daily process, you step out of that loop. Let's zoom out. In ancient societies, whether it was farmers, craftsmen, monks, or builders, life was repetitive by nature. There were no dopamine-heavy distractions, no constant novelty, and yet many of these traditions emphasized ritual, discipline, repetition, presence. Japanese craftsmanship, for example, is rooted in the idea of shokunin, the pursuit of mastery through daily, humble work. A sushi chef may spend years perfecting how to cut fish. A swordsmith might repeat the same motion thousands of times, not because it's glamorous, but because meaning is found inside the repetition. So what does chop wood, carry water actually mean for you? It means this. Your life is not defined by the peaks, it's defined by the patterns. The way you start your morning, the habits you repeat, the effort you give when no one is watching, the consistency you maintain when motivation fades. That's your real life, not the milestones, the maintenance. Here's where most people struggle and resistance sets in. We know consistency matters, but emotionally, we resist it because repetition can feel boring, slow, invisible, unrewarding. Our brains are wired for novelty and quick rewards. So when you're doing something small and repetitive, it feels like it doesn't matter. But that feeling is misleading because in reality, Repetition is what builds everything that lasts. Here's your core shift for today. Stop measuring your life by outcomes. Start measuring it by consistency. Fall in love with the unseen. Instead of asking, what did I achieve today? Ask, did I show up today? Did I do the thing I said I would do? Because showing up is the foundation of everything else. Let's make this real. There's a concept popularized in performance psychology. Improve by 1% every day. It sounds small, but mathematically, if you improve by 1% daily for a year, you end up 37 times better. Not because of intensity, but because of compounding. Imagine closing out December 37 times better than you were in January. Here's how you apply it. Pick one area of your life, fitness, career, mental health, relationships, then ask, what is the smallest version of progress I can make today? Not the perfect workout, not the full transformation, just 10 minutes of movement, one honest conversation, 1 or 2 pages of reading, one moment of awareness. That's your chop wood. And then do it again tomorrow. That's your carry water. Here's something interesting. The people who become exceptional at anything don't obsess over being exceptional. They obsess over the routine, the fundamentals, the daily practice. Think about athletes, musicians, or writers. Their lives are mostly repetition, but they've learned something most people haven't. The repetition is the reward. Let's talk about boredom for a second, because boredom is often where people quit. But what if boredom isn't a signal to stop? What if it's a signal that you're entering the phase where growth actually happens? The early stages of anything feel exciting because they're new, but the later stages feel boring because they require discipline. And that's exactly where most people drop off. There's a story about a monk who asked his master, what does enlightenment feel like? And the master replied, when hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. But the monk said, but everyone does that. And the master said, no. When most people eat, they think about 100 other things. When they sleep, their mind is still running. The difference is presence. Let's bring this out of philosophy and into your Monday. Where in your life are you waiting for something big to feel fulfilled? A promotion, a fitness milestone, a relationship change? What if fulfillment isn't waiting there? What if it's available in the way you make your coffee, do your work, speak to people, show up for yourself daily? So here's your challenge for this week. Something simple but powerful. Pick one daily task you normally rush through or overlook. And this week, do it slowly, do it intentionally, and be fully present. No distractions, no rushing, just do the thing. It might be brushing your teeth, making your breakfast, walking to work, answering emails. Turn it into your version of chop wood, carry water. You don't need a different life to feel more content. You need a different relationship with the life you already have. Because at the end of the day, happiness isn't built in the big moments. It's built in the quiet ones, the repeated ones, the ones no one sees. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment today to notice where you're chopping wood and carrying water and celebrate that. Because that's where your life really is. And if you can, learn to be just there. You don't just find success, you find peace. I'll see you next Monday.